vary. Hi, my name is Robert Woolley. I am the Vice Chair of the Historic Landmarks Commission, and I want to welcome you here this evening. This is a launch of a historic context and historic resource survey. And the first thing I just want to point out, the issue in the room is projects like this make people really nervous. People snooping around your neighborhood, gathering information, taking pictures. It can make people really nervous. But the benefit of doing this project will inform you and others about the rich history and context of San Roque. San Roque is a very unique place among all of the family of neighborhoods in the city, and that is, it feels more like a rural kind of countryside than it does a rigid gridded city street mechanism, which makes it really unique. It has a wonderful urban forest that gives it that country scene, and there's maybe a curb or two, but not many. And the streets are windy and not rigid. There's no other neighborhood really like it. And so it will be important for us to learn more about the neighborhood and help us understand that context. And to navigate that whole process, the architectural historian, Nicole Hernandez, will be leading the charge with some able-bodied consultants. But before I hand it over to her, I just want to acknowledge a couple of council members who are in the room and a few HLC compadres in the room as well. We'll hang around and answer questions along with everybody else at the end. Nicole?
Well, thank you, Commissioner Woolley. I do want to just point to our council members in the room. We do have council member Kristen Sneddon and Oscar Gutierrez in the room, and the other commissioners are Commissioner Drury and Keith Butler in the room. And we also have joining us Mary Lee Days, who was the historian who really laid the groundwork for our preservation program in the city and started the first surveys that we did in the city, which were downtown, which is why so much of our downtown is preserved today. So as Mr. Woolley mentioned, I'm the architectural historian for the city. I have a master's in historic preservation. And here with me tonight is also Ellen Kokinda. And I think we have a picture so you can see our team that's going to be working with this project. Ellen Kokinda is the design review and historic preservation supervisor with the city. And we are joined here tonight by Sarah Corder, who is our architectural historian from South Environmental, who is the consultant. And the rest of this photos are the consultant team that will be doing the survey. This project is funded by a grant from the California State Historic Office of Historic Preservation. As a result of this grant, we're able to conduct this first neighborhood survey in the city in over 13 years. The state really does recognize that historic context statements and survey work is some of the most valuable tools for planning historic preservation. And we also are guided by our general plan adopted by City Council that recognizes a goal for the city is to survey historic resources in the city. So much of downtown, as you know, was surveyed in the late 1970s and through the early 80s. And then also there was some survey work in other neighborhoods of the city through the 2000s, that's why much is preserved. So we're going to illustrate to you why it's such a great planning tool throughout the presentation. And but before, I just wanted to say, save all your questions till the end, and then we'll have a Q&A. That way some of the questions might be answered in the presentation. We are being live streamed on Zoom, but the Q&A is not active on Zoom, just in the room. And we are recording this, and that recording will be available on the website for the project, as well as all updated information. So you saw on your postcard a project description. which I'm just gonna reiterate right now. The grant allows us to partner with a really professional historic preservation consulting firm who will prepare the research for the historic context statement, which is a history of the area, and conduct the survey. This will go through the neighborhood and identify any potential or eligible historic resources. And you can see on our website, we do have the similar historic context for surveys completed throughout the city. There was one done a few years ago, just on African-American historic properties, the waterfront, lower west downtown, and the lower Riviera, and almost all of the Pueblo Viejo area. And I just want to get out of the way what this project is not going to do. We are not going to go through and do code enforcement or identify any violations on any project. That is not our role here. We are not going to create a historic district. We are not going to individually officially designate any individual buildings. That's done at owner request. And we are not, this does not preclude any property from developing an accessory dwelling unit. So I just want to get that cleared up, and then I'm going to hand it to Sarah to talk about a lot of the technicalities of the project.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Sarah Porter. I'm the principal architectural historian at South Environmental, and I am really bad with technology. I will prepare you. We have already started to mention some terms and things that you may not know what they mean. So I want to take just a little step back in the presentation and explain a little bit about the basics of these projects and what they look like and what some of these things mean. So the part one of the project is the historic context statement. And that's really just a fancy way of saying that we're writing a history of your neighborhood. It really is not more than that. It's collecting data, visiting repositories, talking to you folks, talking to your neighbors, other stakeholders, going through old newspapers, city records, just trying to figure out how the neighborhood developed, what kind of buildings and properties there were and still are. And then any notable events or special people and special memories that are here in the neighborhood. And then we go into more technical stuff before we do the survey, and that's identifying things like the architecture that is here. And as many of you know, because you live here, there's some beautiful things here. So we have some great Tudor revival, some craftsmen, Spanish colonial revival, and these cute little English cottages I've been seeing as I've been driving around the neighborhood this evening. So we have lots of different property types too. We clearly have a school because we're in a school and a church, a couple of landscape features like the circle, and many, many residents. So the point of the context is really to figure out what's the history and then what makes the neighborhood really, really special. And then from there, we start to identify the properties that help build that specialness. And then we go from there. So moving on to what the survey kind of looks like. The survey is kind of the second part. The survey is an inventory and evaluation of all the properties within the survey boundaries, which I will get to in just a little bit, that are over 45 years old, have not been previously surveyed, and have recently come of age, which is up to the year 1980. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I am very concerned that 1980 is now historic. It's very concerning to me. For this project, we are actually able to do, with the grant money, we're able to do two different types of surveys, which is a little bit unusual. We are doing the first level, which is called a reconnaissance level or a recon survey. And just based on its name, you can kind of imagine what that means. It's the first look at the neighborhood, kind of walking around, lay of the land, getting an idea of how the buildings are arranged, how the streets were laid out, are there setbacks, are there important landscape features, are there sidewalks and curbs, getting an idea of those things, and then what buildings that are out here now are actually historically significant and might require additional research and survey. For this type of survey, we usually spend no more than 30 minutes on any given street. And it would just be some walking up and down the street, taking some photos, taking some notes. Nothing on any of these surveys is going to be anything that bothers you. Everyone stays in the public right of way. No one approaches your property in any way. And then once we have an idea of what our potentially eligible significant properties are, we move on to the intensive level survey. And that's where we start digging in a little bit more. We start really looking at the features of some of those properties. We start digging into the history of some of those properties. So like pulling the building permits, pulling the as-built drawings, looking at who your architects are, who your builders are, those types of different things that come into the history, who the people are that live there. So these are kind of the things that go into these surveys, and there are a lot of different things that are kind of happening. And surveys are very complicated, and I've done a lot of surveys, and people are generally very concerned when people are walking around their neighborhood, of course. Why would you not be? And people are taking pictures of your home. Why would you not be concerned about that? So with these surveys, I wanted to just spend a little bit of time going through exactly what this looks like and where we're gonna be and when it's gonna happen and what we're gonna look like out there. So as I mentioned before, we do have survey boundaries. So what you see here on the map is what the actual survey boundaries are. So you can see everything is kind of originating from the circle and going outward. And please forgive my Spanish pronunciations. My Southern accent gets in the way of my Spanish sometimes. But our southern boundary is going to be our Calle Noguera. And then our eastern boundary is going to be Calle Laurales. And then northern boundary is going to be Calle Fresno. And western boundary is going to be San Roque Road. So this is where we are focusing on the survey, and the reason for these is the city chose the boundaries based on the largest concentration of buildings before World War II. So these are going to be the oldest kind of buildings in the neighborhood, the largest concentrations of those architectural styles before the war. So the properties that we're looking at, we're going to be looking at them at the reconnaissance level over the next couple of months. So April and May are when we're really going to be looking at everything. And then in June and July, we're going to be coming back out and we're going to be doing the more intensive level survey. All right. So I like to show a picture, not the most flattering picture of myself, but a picture of what we look like when we're out in the field. We usually have some type of ridiculous looking hat to keep the sun off of us. That one is not as bad as some. And we always have these obnoxious orange vests on, just for safety, but also so you can see us coming and you know that it's us. Any person that's in the field is going to either be city staff or they're going to be architectural historians that work for me and work for South. And they're going to be carrying clipboards, they're going to have iPads, they're going to have cameras, notebook, something to take notes. And they're going to look very similar to this. They're going to stand in front of your house. They may pace in front of your house, just because they're trying to get notes on maybe your windows, where your chimney is, and they're trying to take pictures from different angles, maybe to avoid shadow, maybe to avoid light. So that's really what's going to be happening out there when they're actually out there doing the survey. You can go up and talk to them at any time. They are required to be friendly. If they are not, please call me because I will make sure they are friendly the next time you see them. Okay, couple of other questions that often come up. Can you opt out of the survey? Because these surveys are done from the public right of way, there's not really a way to opt out of them. They don't require any access. They're just done from the street. Nothing that we need to set up ahead of time. So we don't really have a way for you to opt out of them. How do we evaluate for significance? Well, the city already has designation criteria, which many of you may already be aware of. The municipal code has already defined designation criteria as well as integrity. Integrity is something that comes up with alterations. So you may have like replacement windows and things like that. That's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about integrity. Those would be things that would impact how your building is going to be significant or not significant. We also have things that are not architecture. So you have maybe association with people, association with events, architects and builders. There's a lot of popular architects and builders that were working in this neighborhood just based on what I've learned so far. And then there's also architectural movements that are happening, lots of pattern book houses that were happening in this neighborhood. So some of those things are kind of coming up just based on the research that we've done so far. As Nicole mentioned, designations is also a big question that people have. Like, if you say my house is significant or it's eligible, what does that mean for me? Am I gonna be designated? And then everything sucks. It doesn't, I promise. Nothing gets designated. We just flag things, we flag them as eligible, we flag them as significant. So local designation here in Santa Barbara is completely separate action. It is done at owner request. It is not done without your consent. It is completely separate. You go for a public meeting before the Landmarks Commission. So because of this project, none of that is going to happen. All right, so we get all of our work done. We've looked at everything. We found your property to be historic and significant and eligible, and we have results. So once we have results, the properties are added to the city's historic resources inventory. The inventory is then fed into an online mapping system that the city manages through their website called the Historic Treasures Map. And that's what you're seeing here on the top. So you can go into the treasures map, anyone can, and you can click on a property. And when you do that, it pulls up the information that you're seeing on the bottom. So you can see the photographs of your property. You can see any studies that have been done. So little thumbnails that don't really look like photographs. Those are reports that were prepared on the property. So that's what you're going to be able to see. And you're going to be able to see any of the research that's been completed on the properties. And because those are a little bit hard to read, I wanted to give you an idea of what that's going to look like. So any significant property in the neighborhood is going to get one of these intensive level survey reports prepared on it. So very detailed history and description with multiple photographs of the building, going into your architectural style, what your property type is, what it was used for, your builders and architects, if we're able to identify that through your permits. So a lot of different fun information in here, and then evaluations as to why it's actually significant. So that's kind of what I have for right now, and then I'm going to turn it back to Nicole to talk about some procedural city things.
Okay, so now that you know more about what a survey is, you might be asking, why did the city choose San Roque for this project? And here are some of the main reasons. As mentioned earlier, much of the downtown area has already been surveyed. And we are also directed by our general plan to conduct surveys. And the houses in San Roque area are pretty vulnerable to redevelopment. As you know, the city is pretty much completely developed, and new construction has shifted largely from infill to redeveloping in existing neighborhoods. San Roque does have a high concentration of houses constructed in the 1920s that are subject to redevelopment. We saw in a 1930 map that there were about 113 homes constructed by 1930 in this area of the neighborhood. And the 1920s was a time when excellent small homes of high quality were being constructed, like in the Tudor style that we talked about earlier, or the English style and craftsman. There was even national movements to encourage this kind of quality small housing. So because it has never been surveyed, many historic resources are now being identified as historic way late in the planning process that really does not benefit the property owner. And I'll illustrate that more in a second. The surveys really streamline your permitting process, and property owners will not have to hire their own historic consultant to review and evaluate their properties. This will already be done for you. And just to be clear, there's the state law, the California Environmental Quality Act, requires the city to review all buildings that are over 50 years old for historic significance. And it happens either through an early survey like this proactively, or after you've already designed a project and you come in for review, then it gets surveyed, which can cause a lot of frustration. So in addition, it also helps us preserve the existing buildings and prevent some demolitions of buildings that might really be treasures to your community. So I just want to talk about our current process when you come in, to the city for, with a project and the future process once this is done. So, once again, whether or not this survey happens, your property gets evaluated as historic or not. Right now, we evaluate it when you come in with a project to the city. So that often happens after you have searched for a house with a real estate agent, purchased a home, planned and dreamed of your dream project, and you had a designer design the alterations. You come into the city to submit for your permit, and we evaluate it and find it's historic. And you often have to have it redesigned so that we protect the facade, the exterior facade of the building and the character defining features. And this is all based on the historic evidence of the building. It can be frustrating, cost a lot of time and money for your project. So after the survey, this is the current process. After the survey is done, we will already have proactively identified buildings that might qualify as historic. It's an excellent planning tool. Having this information up front allows stakeholders from the real estate agents to the potential property buyers, to the owners, to your design team, all better plan for a project. If they know early that it qualifies as historic. You can review the project and consult with the architectural historian to work on the projects that will be right on the right track from the beginning, so that it can meet all the criteria to be approved. Again, saving time, money, and frustration. The goal here is to encourage adaptive reuse of historic buildings. You can remodel the interiors. We don't oversee interiors at all. You can add to the rear of them. We have a whole section in our guidelines that talk about how to add to a historic building. And what we're really looking is to help preserve the facades so that the community has the benefit of these really unique places that are irreplaceable, while you can modernize them and make them meet your needs. And we just want to talk about some of the benefits. So if your property is one of those that is found historically significant, you could go through the designation process and become a structure of merit, which would result in being eligible for our Mills Act program. This is the single most important economic incentive in California for restoration or rehab of buildings. You can get 10%, for the next 10 years after you apply, you can have at least almost up to 50% off your property taxes each year. This is to assist in the restoration and maintenance and updating of the house. A lot of the people come in and do kitchen remodels, updating, or wiring, lighting, painting, re-roofing that often needs done regularly, or restoring woodwork. And we already have over 80 participants in that program citywide. And it also helps you take advantage of our California Historic Building Code, which is really helpful it's a code that recognizes historic buildings can't always meet that regular code, which can cost lots of time and money. And I think one of the best examples I can think of that is recently I had a property owner work with her contractor. Her windows facing the south had been completely deteriorated in this Tudor house she just bought. The contractor did not know about the historic building code and said all her windows had to come to current code. She came in to apply for her project. I evaluated the building, it qualified as historic, and I talked to her about why don't you remake them in wood and use tempered glass, which helps with the high fire regulations. And she said, well, that's what I wanted in the first place, but nobody told me about this code. Well, it's a great tool. It's going to help her keep the character she wants. And we also used the code just 2 days ago. The code says that you cannot extend the scope of work, building and safety. So building and safety staff cannot say, while you're doing all your mold remedies, we want you to undo the ceiling and do fire suppression, which costs tens of thousands of dollars. They can't expand that scope of work using the historic building code. And we have lots of people who seek historic designation just to access that historic building code. So it is really a great tool that California has, and not many other states have it, so we're pretty lucky. And in addition, as a whole community, preservation does really foster community pride and preserves your neighborhood history. We all know that Santa Barbara is exquisitely beautiful and we all have pride in it. And a lot of that is due to the preservation of our historic buildings that make it so much more unique from all the other communities up and down the coast. So I'm gonna turn it back to Sarah one more time for project timelines.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And thanks for talking so nicely about designations. Designations are very far down the road. We are at the beginning of this process with doing historic context statements. We are collecting data. If you visit the project website, you'll see that our first deadline is April the 30th. We are hoping that the community will start submitting information about the neighborhood, information about your homes, any stories that you have to share. Those are the types of things that we're really looking for at this point in the process. And then over the next few months, we'll start working on the survey side of it. And then we'll start preparing those draft documents and they'll be put out for public review a little bit later this year. And then we are estimating to complete the project by April of 2026. And then at the end of the project, the very last step will be a Historic Landmarks Commission review and acceptance, hopefully, of our final document and conclusions. And the best way to stay informed about the project and what's going on, and any details about the future public meetings is the project website. And we do have some handouts tonight about that. And you can get informed through emails and we can also send flyers out to you. Many of you probably received flyers tonight about this meeting. And then, oh, I forgot to switch slides. Sorry about that, guys. I told you, I'm not great with this. So involvement is very important in historic context. Nobody knows the community better than you do. You live here. Some of you may have grown up here, your families may have grown up here. So we want to have the most successful context statement that we can, and that it really comes from the community. When we prepare context statements where the community isn't involved, they don't turn out as good. They kind of lack the heart and soul of the community. I just recently did a project where no one in the community wanted to talk to us, and we just had to go off what we found, and it wasn't as good as it could have been. And that's not something we felt good about, but that's the situation we had. So we really encourage everybody to get involved, and the best way to do that is to start submitting information, whether it's photos, newspapers, architectural plans, anything really relevant to the history of the neighborhood. And just for inspiration, I kind of pulled together this little slide, show you some of the things we found so far. And just want you to kind of leave the meeting tonight thinking about what you might have laying around your house, maybe packed up in the attic, something like that. Maybe you've done some research on your property over the years. Maybe you have some old newspapers. One thing that we've started getting from folks already is family photos, which is super fun, but family photos with buildings in the back of them, that's really fun for us. So that's been super fun for us to see. And we also have a lot of people that say they have original plans for their homes. So there's lots of good stuff out there, stuff that you may not even think is interesting, but we really just want to know everything. So if you have stories about growing up in the neighborhood or anything that you really want to share, I want to hear it. My team wants to hear it. We want to include everything that we can and everything that we can verify into the context to make it as well-rounded as we possibly can. So for more information, we mentioned the project website, but we also have lots of other information available. As you can see on the slide here, information about the project, the city's preservation program, other topics we've talked about tonight. We also have a handout for you. And the project webpage again is where you can find some basic information about the project, as well as it's a platform for sharing information and knowledge about the neighborhood. There's also a sign-in sheet. If you have not signed in, please do so. And we can sign you up as an interested party, and then you'll receive automatic email updates about future meetings for the project. We also encourage everyone to follow the City Preservation Program on Instagram. This is available at SB Historic Preservation. And this just kind of gives you an idea of some of the things that are available on there, a little flavor of the different types of historic resources in the city, and this is updated weekly, so it's sort of fun to look at. It's really unbelievable, the historic gems that are available in the city of Santa Barbara, and we're just really excited to see what kind of gems we can find in this neighborhood and share with everyone too. So I'd like to ask Nicole to come back up one last time to introduce our last.
So I just wanted to, we have someone here who owns a historic structure of merit in the city and in San Roque, and he's offered to come and just give you a brief tidbit of property owner's point of view. And I'd like to introduce Glenn.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be through the last week, we're really excited. I'll be quick.
Yes.
So we just moved in, my wife and I just moved into the San Roque neighborhood. And, on Calle Alamo, we're fortunate to purchase a home that was, the architect was Edwards, Plunkett and Howell. And the house has been redone like 3 or 4 years ago, but absolutely beautiful home. We were really excited to move into the neighborhood and to move into a home that had so much historic significance. We worked with Nicole recently to obtain the structure of merit and went to the Historic Landmarks Commission and were awarded that designation. We just feel very fortunate to be able to live in a historical house and be able to, she wrote a beautiful report. I mean, it's 5-6 pages, and we learned so much more about the house that we even knew about before we purchased it. So it was just a lot of good information. We feel fortunate to be in this home. We love Santa Barbara's rich history, historic homes, embody the architecture and cultural evolution of the area. And by living in one of these homes, you feel directly connected to the story of the city. And we always laugh if only the walls could talk, what they would say. I mean, the home was built in 1927. So just what took place, we would love to have known, but you can at least enjoy the architecture. We're looking, you know, we love the house, we're looking forward to taking care of it. And I think with the structure of merit designation, it will allow us to have the opportunity to take care of it so it can be there for future generations to enjoy and be able to have a glimpse into the past of the homes in the Santa Barbara area. So thank you very much, and thanks Nicole for all your work on this.
So now we have questions. Have some questions? Yes. My question is, my question is, okay, you stuff would mandate only certain colors you can paint your homes because they're for.
Did everybody hear the question?
I know, oh, I can repeat it. She wanted to know if you would be mandated only certain paint colors on your home. Outside, no. We do have a section on how to paint historic homes of different styles and different suggested palettes. Often when property owners want to change their paint colors, they send their ideas to me, I take a quick look and we just approve it. Typically, everyone in Santa Barbara wants a really beautiful paint palette. I think the only few times we have had to say, let's reconsider those paint colors is like in El Pueblo Viejo, someone wanted to paint one of the Spanish styles down there bright blue. And that is just not appropriate for that style, but typically we're very flexible with paint. It's not gonna destroy the house, but we just wanna make sure it's compatible with the whole neighborhood. The other, I'm sorry, the other, how do you manage how loud it gets? The other question is, if you have a couple of old windows that are getting eaten out by Father Time, they're almost 100 years old, and of course they're single pane, they have to be replaced. But looking into the cost of having
one specially built, because nobody does that. No, Anderson Windows doesn't do that. They're typically, you have to have it done by an artisan, and that's cost prohibitive. And I've lived here since 1960. That's a long time in San Roque. So can you imagine what it does to a normal homeowner, somebody that can't afford to move into Santa Barbara?
Yes, in fact, I deal with window replacement every day. That's probably the biggest issue we deal with. So we have a few, we do have some, we keep a list of manufacturers that can help replicate the historic homes. And, we have a lot of them that understand the high fire needs and needs of the area and, can help address those issues. And, there's several different manufacturers that do really specialize this, and we can help you work with them. And surprisingly, when you look around, there are some that are really expensive, and then there are some that are more reasonable. So we keep a list, and most of the people on that list are people who have worked in Santa Barbara on the historic homes, and the homeowners came to me and told me, these guys were reasonable, they did a great job. So I try to keep a list of resources to help you, because I know it's a little bit like searching in the dark. Like, where do I turn? How do I get this done? So we try to help you, walk you through all that process.
So therefore, if you have one of those windows that you'd shown, one of the big ones that used to be called picture window in the old days. And now the glass, of course, the single pane, very dangerous because it doesn't have any, but what happens when they break? They turn into dagger shards. And that becomes a real big problem. You can't replace it with that kind of a window. And hope and the integrity of it. It's very expensive. Like I said, I've lived here longer than what you both have been alive.
I've replaced windows in historic homes, and I too understand. And I know a lot of people in Santa Barbara that I work with will be replaced, they replace with tempered glass to get a stronger glass in there. And, you know, visually it's the same, and it also is what, our fire department requires for high fires, the tempered. So often you can put it in the same frames or work with someone sort of different. So we have some options. Everything, unfortunately with historic homes, each one's a little different. So I think it's hard to have a blanket answer for everyone, but we try and work with each unique scenario to get what you need.
My question is, real quick, I don't think I need the microphone is, a lot of the houses in this area have hedges out front, and how are your people gonna be standing on the street surveying, you know, the window types and that sort of thing? Will they come onto the property? Will you notify the homeowners if you're coming onto the property? How will that work?
Can you repeat the question? Because I just want to make sure for the recording that.
So the question was, if you have hedges or you have any type of fencing or anything like that that blocks the view of your home from the street, how would we be able to see it? How would we be able to survey it? Well, technically, if you have blockages, we're never coming on your property. That's not going to happen. Unless you invited us onto your property, that would be a different situation. But we would typically flag your property as not visible. Like so, and we would make attempts. We would go around multiple times to see if we could see it. Sometimes you can see properties if they have a gate open and we can take a picture that way. But if we just can't see it, we can't see it. That's just the nature of doing survey from the public right of way. So we're definitely not going to encroach on your property.
If we could use the microphone just for our recording as well, and it helps everybody here.
My question is about how you are going to make sure that all of the residents in San Roque know about this project. I do not remember how I first heard about it. Now, I see that you have this postcard, and possibly I received a postcard, but I do not remember whether it was a postcard or whether I read something online And I only had one source of this information to come to this meeting. So I made a note of it and I came. But there's so few people here. I'm sure that so many people don't know anything about this meeting. So I would like to know what your plans are to ensure that everybody who lives within this area receives this kind of information, because I don't think that they have received it.
Great question. We sent the postcard to every, property owner to the address that is listed with the tax record. So if you get your tax bill, you probably got the postcard. And we also sent it to, just the address in case there were residents who were not property owners. And at the end of the survey, we will do the same, but we will also try and, put it through local social medias and other avenues. Ellen may have more ideas, but we always typically go through the tax records of who is the property owner and the correct address.
So Ellen Kincaid, the design review supervisor, thank you for the question. As Nicole mentioned, we mailed every single property owner who may or may not live in a home in San Roque and all the residents. We have our website. We're currently recording this particular meeting because I think you all are, the gung-ho ones who are still showing up to public meetings, which we really love to see and really appreciate, because that's, it's always an effort. But we recognize that there's different levels of interaction with public information. So again, we have our whole slew of social media references. Word of mouth, I think, is going to be really key with this too. So I'm going to invite all of you to, please tell like 5 of your closest neighbors if they haven't done it. So a lot of people get a postcard, and we have to rely on, are people paying attention? And just again, fingers crossed. And we didn't know, would we get 5 people here tonight or 100? So post-COVID is like another question of how do people engage. But again, I think that we want to make this the most accessible. And so we've got the recording. People can access it at a later time. Looking to you to tell your neighbors. We do any kind of updates at the Historic Landmarks Commission. So we do kind of actively talk about this project. We have our city council members here. We have Planning Commissioner DeLucio here. So we've got lots of different touch points to kind of be able to discuss this and share this information. And then if there are things that we're missing that are really critical, bursts of information of how do you get information, let us know and we can try to explore that avenue of communication as well. So it's a little bit kind of proaction, being proactive on your part. And then we're definitely trying to utilize all of our resources here. So if we're missing something, I'd love to hear it.
So I suggest that everybody takes some of these home with you and pass it out to your neighbors. That's
Absolutely. And we also have a QR code if you like. We've got lists of the links so you can kind of pass them around because there's different levels of comfort and engagement with technology, and again, just having a hard sheet of paper and just being able to pass that along. That's why we brought extra. We have business cards that for anyone who's interested, you can just simply take a business card and say, can you tell me what this is? So there's, we, again, just trying to make this accessible for whatever level of comfort you might have.
Here and then we have a question for you, and it's about, is the house the gentleman spoke about, is it called the House of Historic Merit, or the name? They call them historic structures of merit. So do those homes, are they exempt from building from code violations? And because that house, has a hedge that's in the setback, and the easement in the front that's 8 feet tall. It has a wall that's over 4 feet tall. And you can't have anything higher than 18 inches. It has a gate. It has a do not park in front of our gate. It has red flags, do not park here. It's got an electric gate on the driveway in that in that 10-foot easement, so that everyone who walks in the street is pushed to the street because there's no walking easement. So my point is that our homes with this designation are exempt from all of that. And no, they have to go through, they're subject to, it's case by case, they might have gotten an exemption through a zoning hearing. But we don't, I don't know how to answer that.
So a couple of things. So, you know, we have projects will come in. If they trigger design review, then they come and get a plan. They go through the planning process first, and then they go through building and safety to get your building permit. We're interested in community development to make sure that we're overseeing health and safety issues. So anything requires a building permit. But to get to your question, every single property in Santa Barbara probably has different violations, but through this project, we're not out to enforce or to police particular, you know, while we're doing this survey. It's not to necessarily point out, oh, that's not permitted, that's not permitted, that's not permitted, and do any kind of enforcement action through that. But it doesn't mean that if you see something there, it doesn't mean that if you see something there that they took the appropriate action that they needed to. Like, if you do most, you know, if you're doing construction on a site, you need a building permit. So there's, I don't know when you point out all of these individual items as to whether or not it's permitted or not. Right. Right, and so I acknowledge that, and again, I could probably go, like, I live on the west side, I could probably name a number, like, I could look at every house and notice that there's building permit violations or zoning violations that we would see, but again, this project, we're not trying to call out anyone, and we're not trying to enforce on anyone, we're really just trying to discover the history of it. And so, yes, there might be, you know, it doesn't negate the fact that
It
there's.
doesn't exempt it, is what you're saying.
That's
so.
right. It doesn't exempt it, but again, we're not trying to force people into compliance through this initiative. We're simply trying to do a historic survey and research. So we have Jay over here.
Maybe you could explain a little bit about what the process might mean for somebody that does end up with a historic structure in context of the questions about paint color and windows, because I feel like we might have left a couple things out of the answer in terms of what the process looks like if an owner wants to make a change that is disagreeable with your findings or the context, and that doesn't necessarily mean it can't, but it's a prolonged process, and so I think that might, we were talking about that earlier, Sarah, and so is that, but do it non-technically.
I'll try. So if your house is one of the ones that is found to be historically significant, what happens when you want to come in for a project? The project is brought in for me to look at first, and we look to preserve the intact elements on the front facade, and we use the certain standards, they're national standards that everyone in the country that does preservation uses, that helps restore the front facade. So pretty much trying to keep that front facade like it looked when it was built. So if you have a, you know, arched entranceway and terracotta tiles and a wood door, we'd want to keep all that. And that would be something we would look at and say, you know, let's keep that part. What else do you want to do? And lots of times, usually what we see most often are rear additions. And then we work with you to do that because it's less visible from the street. We understand you need more room. So that would be, that's what happens when it comes in. And if it is a large addition or something larger, it would go to the Historic Landmarks Commission. That would be the review body. They are the experts in historic preservation. If you wanted to go ahead and change those items, even though they don't meet the standards, that is a more complicated process. You would have to go, you would not get a CEQA exemption. The California Environmental Quality Act would require you to do environmental impact report, which is a very extensive report on that you're gonna do something negative to a historic building, and that would include tearing it down. And that's really what, I think you would not want to see your neighbors do if there's a lovely historic building on your block. This is a very deterrent item, doing an environmental impact report to tear down a house. I've only seen one done in my 13 years here, as most people would rather restore the historic facade and work to expand in the ways that we're really flexible in. And it usually ends up being a successful project for the neighbors and the owner. But it is, that's sort of the process you go through.
I have a question about the historic context statement or background, and so you have the borders around about the buildings being surveyed. But I'm imagining, I want to ask, but the stories about the neighborhood could go well beyond those boundaries, and then maybe how to get that message out, like maybe through the families at Peabody Charter School, or notices going out further than just in those boundaries, because I think there are quite a few people who maybe lived in San Roque for 50, 60 years, but don't happen to live here now, and might have stories to share also.
I think that's a great idea. I think that in terms of boundaries, the stories don't end in the lines that we showed you. So I think we can look into that and trying to, again, utilize different avenues and looking at, I think one idea is, do you know someone who has stories? And do you want to give, like, ask if we could share contact information? Because I think that we might not capture it if we send postcards necessarily, but you all might know point people or super connectors, or like, oh my gosh, if we could only talk to this so-and-so or so-and-so, or maybe this person isn't living, you know, this person lives in Texas now. But they grew up, they know the history of San Roque more than anything. I think that would be such a great idea, and I know the team would be really welcome that, and we would, again, try to make things as accessible as possible to be able to make those connections.
I just have one example. When we did our African American historic context statement, after it was all done and published on the website, there was a woman who grew up in Santa Barbara, an African American woman who moved to Texas. She was doing her family genealogy, and she found our historic context statement. And she's like, I have so much stories and photos to add. I said, well, go ahead and add them, and we can extend it. You know, it kind of becomes a living document. We can add to it. And she sent me beautiful pictures of her in 5th grade in front of Lincoln School, which was torn down. And she sent pictures of her mom as a Rosie the Riveter in World War II. And it was just really beautiful stories that we did, just because this might have one deadline, doesn't mean we can't add it to the website, add it to the stories of the neighborhood, even though we don't capture it all, but people do kind of come from far and wide once you get the more information out there. We try as much as we can, but definitely want to hear from anybody who has one.
Follow up on that, I'd like to suggest that you also solicit input from residents of our senior communities here in Santa Barbara, because there must be very many of them who lived here a long time.
Great idea. Thank you.
Ma'am, I appreciate that. We actually utilized that on a project recently. We found that that was really a useful tool to just go to some of the senior communities and just sit down with folks and talk to them. So I have team members already lined up to do some of that work. So it's, I really appreciate that feedback, because it's kind of a new thing that people don't always think about. So I really do appreciate that.
Are there any other questions? I know we're coming up on 7 o'clock, and I'm trying to keep things on time for you all, but I don't want to cut anybody off if there's any other question. Okay, so again, we've got this upcoming deadline. We've got business cards, we've got important links, papers, we've got postcards. Grab a couple, please share them with your neighbors. Please let everybody know, maybe challenge yourself to tell 5 people. That's my ask to you all. I didn't know I was gonna give you homework tonight, but you all gave me that idea. So thank you for doing that. And then I just wanna, did you all want to say anything else? Thank you so much to our council members who supported this effort, our historic landmark commissioners who are here to, again, usher you through. Oh, it looks like we have someone online who can ask a question. I don't know. Apologies.
Let's see if we can get her to unmute. Let's see.
No, we've set up the technology.
Yeah.
So for the person online, if it's not, I don't think we're gonna be able to connect necessarily, so I think we can share our contact information and follow up. But I don't necessarily wanna hold everybody else up in this time. But again, thank you all for coming out, and we look forward to working with you moving forward.
Please feel free to take.
Oh, yeah.
Take cookies as well, please.
Okay.
I like this.